Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Well, that's interesting because, Tony, when you are investigating, and not just this case, but when you're investigating any kind of a case and you have something identifiable like a fingerprint, but it's in more of a public place, how do you tie that in with, and what's the significance of that throughout the investigation? And, explain kind of how you tied the hat and the evidence from the hat into, and linked it with that fingerprint.
Well, that's kind of the cool part of this case, because obviously a fingerprint is not time stamped. It could be a week old, it could be a month old, it could be a year old. We've had cases where we pull fingerprints off from very, very old things. But in this particular case, we were lucky because we had the partial profile from the hat and we had a potential suspect. So the only trick is getting a reference sample from the suspect, because obviously we need more witness, more evidence. Now, Mr. Jones was shot and killed during his final robbery in Fashion Valley. But because of that, it was an officer-involved shooting, so all the evidence still remains. So we still had DNA samples from that shooting back in the early 90s. So we were able to take some blood from that case from Mr. Jones, develop a DNA profile, and compare it with the DNA profile from the hat. And lo and behold, guess whose DNA was in the hat? Mr. Jones.
And so the hat and the fingerprint put him at the scene. And then so the hat basically was kind of the key in order to tie this whole thing together, correct?
Well, yes, the hat's what convinced me. I mean, we always try to play, I guess my technique is I try to prove that the suspect didn't do it. And if I can't do that, then I'm well on my way to proving that he did do it. And in this particular case, the hat, and we also found some DNA underneath the fingernails of Mr. Botts that, when again, it was not a high number, I think it was 8 or 9, but it was enough to show that, he's had physical contact with the victim. He dropped the hat. He has a fingerprint. It's him.
So yeah, that's absolutely awesome. And I one thing about the DNA testing that you were talking about, Suzanne, is, over, especially in 2004, you think about what you're able to do in your lab in 2024 compared to 2004, or even 2014, those 10-year blocks, the amount of technology and sensitivity that it's night and day. I tell people, well, a couple of things. I tell people, number one, if you haven't tested something in the last 5 years, you haven't tested it. And I think I actually stole that from Cloyd. So
Probably.
Another good friend of ours, detective up in Seattle. So, but it's pretty much true, because, the sensitivity of the lab is so much better since even just 5 years ago. And so your ability to find more loci and also you increase things. What did it used to be? I think the number of loci today versus even 5 years ago, it's didn't it go up like 7 or 8?
Yeah. So when I first started 25 years ago, we were doing Profiler, or there was or PowerPlex 1.1. It was 9 or 10 loci. And then they added Cofiler. So that was 7 loci, but a couple of them were redundant. So that gave us a total of 13 loci to upload to CODIS. And then we went to Identifiler, which is 16 loci, 17 with amylogenin. And now we're looking at 24 loci with Global Filer. And there are other kits, but they're all about the same. And then the same with the male-specific testing, YSTRs. We used to look at, was 17, and now it's 27 loci. So also, increasing the number of loci that we're looking at there, and that can help with discriminating between individuals.
And when you say loci, explain what that is really quick.
It's just a location on the DNA molecule. So all humans are going to have this specific short tandem repeat, this section of DNA. So every human has a STR at this location on the DNA molecule, but the difference is in the number of times that specific pattern repeats over and over again.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, I like to describe it kind of as like a heart monitor, because then people can see the little blips going up. That's kind of like what a loci would look like when it's. Is that okay?
Well, yes, but that doesn't really tell you what it is. That tells you what it looks like, right? And that's what we're looking at. The data we're looking at kind of looks like it's called an electropherogram. But yes, it would kind of look like an EKG where you're going along, and then you have these peaks. And those peaks correspond to the pieces of DNA. So, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I just, there's a lot of people listening and watching this on YouTube and Rumble that, by the way, everybody that's listening or watching, please subscribe and share this episode so that other folks can understand what an amazing case this is. But so, Suzanna, you return these results. Tony, you're able to take these results and put the puzzle together. So you're confident that it's the Norman Jones, and this kid that sounds like he was in trouble, basically from the age of 14. The news article that I read said he was 16 at the time in 1977 that he would have committed this murder. I have a couple of 14-year-olds, and I can't imagine those guys, getting into robberies already, and let alone, 2 years from now, one of my boys being a murderer. You really have to, do you know anything about this Lamont Jones or Norman Jones, why he was in the situation that he was?
Well, some people are just bad people, and I think Norman Jones was one. He was actually involved in 3 separate robbery series during his life. First one, of course, they start out small. They're street robberies. Then he graduated to commercial robberies. And then, of course, finally he was shot to death by police in a commercial robbery. Interesting thing is robbers develop certain patterns. They don't realize it, but their MO becomes very distinctive if they continue to commit crimes. And the one thing that kind of did Norman Jones in was he liked to target businesses in shopping centers. Now, most robbers won't touch a shopping center because, what's the problem with the shopping center? You have to park your car a long ways away. You've got a lot of witnesses. It's just a bad place to rob. But for some reason, he seemed to like those. And he robbed, in one case, he robbed a bank that was right next door to Botts' shop after the murder of Botts. But he seemed to elicit a lot of sympathy, too. And there were a couple of articles in the local newspaper about how, he had such a tough life and things like that. My personal feeling, he's just a bad dude, and he needs to be locked up.
Well, if you're doing it enough that the cops are right there and they start catching you, and your response is to get in a firefight with them, then it usually doesn't end well. So let's move to a little more positive subject here. So, Tony, describe what it was like to call Frank's kids and tell him that you'd solved the case.
Well, that was the most gratifying, as it always is, part of the case, is when you finally think, yeah, we've got it, we figured it out, we know it. And to call his son, I think, was a point of contact with the family. And it was certainly very gratifying to be able to put this one aside. And you can't bring Mr. Botts back, obviously, but at least knowing what happened is some kind of a solace.
Yeah, I've been doing this in forensics, at least for, 12, I'm going on 13 years now. You guys, quite a bit longer. I've never had anything more gratifying than being able to talk to a victim's family and know that, I'm just the MBAC part of it, but, even just that, knowing that our technology helps solve cases, and then on the rare occasion that I actually get to know either the victim or some of the investigators that, you struggle with these cases and yet you never give up. And then a new technology will come around and you're like, oh crap, man, maybe this will work. And lo and behold, it does. To me, it's just amazingly satisfying knowing that
Well,
we've
I
helped.
just attended a symposium in Jacksonville, Florida on cold cases. And it was unique in the fact that in this particular symposium, a lot of victims were invited to participate. And really, that's what it's all about, because obviously the deceased person is deceased and you can't really do anything for them, but the families are really the victims that we deal with. What I was amazed about in this symposium is that a lot of the family victims, they didn't really know what was going on with their case. The police wouldn't talk to them. The level of their lack of knowledge was astounding to me. And it really kind of helped me to make sure that next time on the next case, I'm going to really keep the family in the loop, unless, of course, they're the suspects. But that's what it's all about. This job is the family members.
Yeah. Suzanna, what's your experience with that?
Well, in my role, we don't deal directly with family members very often. Now, certainly I've been in court before and, testifying and family members in the courtroom. So that would be my experience. But mostly for me, the phone call I make is to the investigator, right? So I'm calling the investigator to say, hey, we've got a DNA profile, or we've got a match, or we have a CODIS hit, so that's the gratifying phone calls that I get to make. So, and it's true. It feels great to be able to be, a part of that. I mean, or two, for me, I don't care whether it in some ways, I don't care whether it matches or doesn't match. It's still an important piece of information, right? So if Tony had sent this profile and it doesn't match, okay, then that's fine. Now let's move on to the next suspect, and it's still a part of the investigation, and that would allow the investigators to say, okay, we need to focus on someone else, or perhaps there were two people involved. It adds information to the investigation, whether it's a match or not a match. Of course, when you do have that matching profile, then that's a sense of closure in some ways, if the investigator is able to, that my role is over at that point, and then the investigator has to put those pieces together. Mm-hmm. I did have a question for Tony, though. Was anything ever done with the hair from the hats?
Yes, we sent the hair to Astria, and guess who it belonged to? Norman Jones.
It did belong to him?
It did.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. I never heard that piece of the puzzle. I only knew, or I thought perhaps that was done based upon the news article that I saw where they listed all the labs that had been involved in this case. And I saw Astria come up. And Tony is so well-versed in this field. He's the one that told me about Astria Forensic and about the ability to get SNP profiles, genealogical profiles from rootless hairs. And this was years ago. So he's really on the forefront. He knows what he's talking about. He's paying attention to what's going on in the forensic world and the advancements. And I would bet that fingerprint, you said in 2021 that the fingerprint was matched to the suspect. That probably was an advancement in forensic technology that allowed that, I would suspect.
It was. I could talk all about that as well. It's a new computer algorithm called NGI, and we're getting hits on fingerprints right and left. It's like unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah, well, look at that. You guys need to come on my podcast more often so that you can not only share data and share I did do something with that hair. So
yeah,
all good stuff.
Awesome.
So hey, I appreciate you guys, just because number one, you're so just consummate professionals, and talking about these cases, to me, it's important because even though this case was, Frank Botts was murdered 46 years ago. Number one, he's still a victim, and his case, he's deserving of justice. And so your persistence in solving the case is critically important. But number two, when we put out podcasts like this, I think it's important because there's people that listen to it. Like, I guarantee there's somebody that's listening to this right now that is going to hear about, this new hair technology. They'll hear about the MVAC. They'll hear about pure gold forensics. They'll, all of these little pieces of information that they may not have heard before. And they're like, oh, you know what? My cousin was murdered 30 years ago, and maybe something like this will help with her case. And so that's just kind of how information gets spread. And the true crime community is really, it's pretty amazing, the number of people that listen to true crime podcasts and videocasts, and then they'll hear information like this and they'll think, holy cow, maybe my department has never heard of the MVAC, or maybe my department has never heard of pure gold forensics. And based on this podcast, they'll spread that information, and it just makes the entire law enforcement, the entire investigative community better by sharing this information and getting it more and more widespread. And the last thing I'd add to that is, I think it helps the community, because knowing that there's guys like you, Tony, out there that even after 46 years, you're still going to persist and try to solve a case. Although, some of his kids are probably old enough that they're not going to be around too much longer. So, but it still matters. Solving these kind of cases helps the community, and it puts more faith in the law enforcement community, where, the law enforcement agencies saying, you know what, these guys will never give up on my case if anything happens to me.
Yep, I can't agree more. It means something. When you kill somebody, you've kind of taken away everything that they have and everything that they're ever going to have. That's a quote from a Clint Eastwood movie. But essentially, it's the worst thing you can do, and we should never give up. And new technology continues to advance, and I can only wait to see what's going to happen in the future.
All right. Well, Suzanna, appreciate you coming on again. It's good seeing you.
Yep. Anytime. Great to be here. I love talking about a case that is, involved the MVAC. I've got plenty of them. So come back and tell you some more stories.
Absolutely. All right, Tony. Thank you also for sharing this about Frank, and, rest in peace. I'm glad that his family is finally able to know that his case isn't just a cold case. It's one that's actually solved. And we'd look forward to talking to you guys about the next one. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.